Trump presidency in crisis. John Bolton has become the highest-ranking U.S. official to write an insider account of his experience inside President Trump's White House. Bolton was once ambassador to the United Nations and served 3 previous Republican presidents. When he was chosen for the job as National Security Advisor in 2018, Bolton was highly praised by Trump and his allies.
I think he's going to be a fantastic representative of our team. He's highly respected by everybody in this room. You are going to do a fantastic job, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
But now, Bolton's new memoir, The Room Where It Happened, has rattled the White House.
Walk into the White House. You'd worked for 3 other presidents, both Bushes and Reagan. What was immediately different about the Trump White House?
This was not like a White House I had ever seen before. It was not functioning in the same way as any of the 3 previous presidents I had worked for.
Bolton is back in the spotlight because of his new book. But that doesn't make him morally superior to Donald Trump. Bolton is defined by his fierce ideology and warmongering. But as someone who was once the most senior advisor to President Trump, Bolton has extended knowledge of the inner workings of the White House.
John Bolton is actually not a better person than Donald Trump just because he has this new book and everybody's talking about it. John Bolton is actually a warmonger, is obsessed with war with Iran, your own country. So this is something I would like to emphasize as we focus on John Bolton's new book, is that John Bolton is not a morally superior person to Donald Trump.
Bolton describes President Trump as naive and dangerous, adding that he hopes his former boss would be remembered as a one-term president.
There were things that we went over again and again and again that just didn't seem to sink in, like why was the Korean Peninsula partitioned in 1945 at the end of World War II, and what did that lead to, and how did we get to that point?
You say in the book that Trump asked General John Kelly if Finland was part of Russia.
He said those things, absolutely. And when you're dealing with somebody who asks questions like that, it's very hard to know how to proceed.
The president's loyalists know they are staring at a problem that isn't disappearing. In his memoir, Bolton argues that the real problem with Donald Trump is not just his ignorance or his policies, but his character. It seems that Bolton's views about Trump are increasingly shared by many Americans, including some of the president's former supporters. The surprisingly low turnout at Trump's campaign rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, might be a sign of his sinking popularity.
I think the majority of Americans and the majority of the global population wishes that Trump will be a one-term president, and it seems very likely at this time. Trump is disintegrating. His popularity is eroding. There were many empty seats a couple of days ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The height of Trump's popularity used to be in Oklahoma. Now, not so many people are showing up for him. So this book from John Bolton is coming at a very bad time for Trump, in which he's already in political trouble.
Trump had sought to reinvigorate his flagging campaign in the face of a crushing health and economic crisis, as well as nationwide anti-racism protests. But his first campaign rally in months, which was littered with bizarre and false claims, proved a disappointment.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. I stand before you today to declare the silent majority is stronger than ever before.
Trump was reportedly furious at the underwhelming crowd at his much-hyped rally in Tulsa. The president has another reason to be upset. A new national Ipsos-Reuters poll has found that former Vice President Joe Biden leads President Trump 48% to 35%. Another survey by Fox News, Trump's favorite news network, showed him trailing Biden by 12 percentage points. Has America reached a tipping point in Trump's popularity?
It's looking very bad for President Trump to be reelected. There's no guarantee, but we need to continue to do the work to elect progressives in local races. Joe Biden is not really a great progressive, but America, I think, is sick of Donald Trump. They're sick of his psychotic policies, his anti-immigration policies, putting kids in cages. The people have really had it with his racism, the way that he refers to the COVID-19 virus as Kung flu recently in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you got to remember, Trump never won the popular vote. He won the presidential election by winning the Electoral College, which is an archaic way of electing the president in this country.
John Bolton says Trump's personal and political interests override any other concerns, including morality and even law. The former security advisor says Trump is not fit for office.
I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump.
What is so unsettling about Trump that drives away even some of his former loyalists?
Well, that's actually something that comes up in this new book by John Bolton, that he said that every single decision that Trump made was all about the possibility of the impact on his reelection, including every single foreign policy decision, and that John Bolton describes Trump as kind of having a bad case of ADD. He cannot focus on one thing.
President Trump is angry at Bolton for spilling the beans on his personal character and his presidency. Trump does not want the American people to read the book.
He wrote a book, and if the book gets out, he's broken the law. And I would think that he would have criminal problems. And maybe he's not telling the truth. He's been known not to tell the truth a lot. So we'll have to see what the book is all about.
A federal judge denied the Trump administration's request to block the book's publication. The administration's attempt was roundly condemned as antithetical to the First Amendment. In another era, it could have been quite a controversy for a sitting US president to threaten an author with a lawsuit for writing a book. But Trump's presidency is riddled with examples of trying to silence journalists, censor books, and punish political views the president doesn't like.
Over the course of the...
just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Mr. President.
What are the implications of such restrictive actions for democracy and freedom of speech?
Trump doesn't have a basic understanding of law, religion, truth, right and wrong. He's kind of lacking in all of the major legal and moral principles. Trump doesn't even have the basic understanding of the Constitution. So for Trump to make a maneuver to try to stop this book, he doesn't understand our own Constitution. The First Amendment protects speech, it protects diversity of opinion, it protects the freedom of religion.
Bolton is not the first senior advisor to Trump to dissent. Former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, former Pentagon Chief James Mattis, and former Chief of Staff John Kelly all let loose on Trump. They all made clear their misgivings about the president's behavior. But Bolton is the first to provide details. Bolton says most of the president's decisions were widely driven by his desire for re-election.
You say that you were astonished by what you saw. A president for whom getting reelected was the only thing that mattered, even if it meant endangering or weakening the nation?
Well, I think he was so focused on the re-election that longer-term considerations fell by the wayside. There was considerable emphasis on the photo opportunity and the press reaction to it, and little or no focus on what such meetings did for the bargaining position of the United States.
Are you saying that all decisions the president made were driven by re-election?
Thank you very much, El Paso. Thank you very much.
I didn't see anything where that wasn't the major factor. So a lot of people have complained that he has a short attention span and he doesn't focus. I want to say when it comes to re-election, his attention span was infinite.
According to the book, Trump came very close to actually quitting NATO, thought invading Venezuela would be cool, and cultivated close personal relationships with dictators. Trump also insisted that Ukraine hand over incriminating information about Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. He manipulated U.S. relations with China almost entirely for his personal and political interests, specifically to boost his re-election prospects. Bolton describes Trump as stunningly uninformed on foreign affairs. Trump has pulled out of multiple international treaties and alienated many of America's traditional allies. Has Trump damaged America's global standing?
Well, I would argue that America already had a damaged global standing because of America's addiction to imperialism and military adventurism, spending $7.5 billion on weapons every year. We're obsessed with violence. We're obsessed with explosions, drones, bombs, torture. So America's global standing was already pretty damaged. Trump has brought it to a new low with things like the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. In the big picture, there's also Bush and Cheney. There's what Bush and Cheney did. There's the Vietnam War, what the Democrats like LBJ did, escalating the Vietnam War. There's what Hillary Clinton did by convincing Barack Obama, President Obama, to invade or participate in a NATO invasion of Gaddafi's Libya. And so really the larger question is, what is America's global standing?
America is in crisis at home too. The census unfolding across the country over the past few weeks have been profoundly disturbing. The entire country has been gripped by protests against racial inequality and police brutality following the brutal murder of African-American George Floyd in police custody.
The police are not the problem. I don't care what you think. I don't care how angry you are. They are working under a system. The problem is the system.
Then, John Bolton's new book came, followed by Trump's unexpected firing of Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan who had investigated the president's inner circle.
Over the past 2 days, this sordid, ham-handed plot by President Trump and Attorney General Barr to oust a well-respected U.S. attorney played out in public view.
These events happened in the midst of a grossly mishandled coronavirus pandemic that has overwhelmed the U.S. public health sector, devastated the economy, and claimed more than 120,000 lives. All of this point to a country in crisis with a president who is unable to lead.
I'm very hopeful that he is so out of touch with where the country is going, becoming more progressive, becoming more anti-racist, becoming more compassionate about these issues of racial justice and institutional racism, that I'm really hoping that Trump will be swept out of office, and that really will have a political revolution in which the kind of politics that he represents will also be swept out, that it won't be just about one man, but it'll be about a flowering of consciousness that we really need.
Tensions with China. U.S. policy towards China is arguably the most important business any American president will conduct. China is America's largest trading partner, and next to Mexico and Canada, is the third largest export market for the U.S. China is a key test of America's foreign policy, its national security, and preservation of interests. But Donald Trump has exploited and manipulated this crucial relationship almost entirely to serve his political and personal interests. Trump has pushed the world's two largest economies into a bitter trade war.
We are now making it clear to China that after years of targeting our industries and stealing our intellectual property, the theft of American jobs and wealth has come to an end.
Military tensions are also rising in the South China Sea, and the two countries are engaged in a war of words over the coronavirus pandemic.
COVID, to be specific, COVID-19 That name gets further and further away from China as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus.
Relations between the US and China have nosedived since Trump took office. Is a new Cold War on the horizon?
The push against China has been basically initiated by the U.S. China seems to me to be more or less the innocent party. It didn't ask for these tensions with the U.S. The U.S. Brought them to China. So I see the Cold War, if you want to put it that way, as something initiated by the U.S. more or less to cover its own failings and to target China more or less as a means to distract people's attentions from the dire situation that the U.S. itself finds itself in.
President Trump has even raised the possibility of a complete decoupling from China. Decoupling, the process of breaking the deeply intertwined economic links between the two countries, would represent a major change in U.S.-China relations.
We could cut off the whole relationship. Now, if you did, what would happen?
Trump made the threat as his trade representative Robert Lighthizer told Congress that China had been living up to the terms of a Phase 1 trade deal and that decoupling was not possible. Trump's Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, however, says the president will consider decoupling from China.
There may be a time when we have a decoupling. That's something the president will consider. But this president has been tougher on China than anyone, and it's only because of the president's tariffs that we were able to get a Phase 1 trade deal, which has done more than any previous administration, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the office.
But the fate of that agreement hangs in the balance in the face of the heightened tensions between the two countries.
There had been progress made on that trade deal. But given everything that's happened and all the things you just listed, is that over?
It's over, yes. I think that here's, I think, the turning point. They came here on January 15th to sign that trade deal. Yep. And that was a full 2 months after they knew the virus was out and about. It was at the time when they had already sent hundreds of thousands of people to this country to spread that virus. And it was just minutes after Wheels Up, when that plane took off, that we began to hear about this pandemic. And I think everybody here inside the perimeter and around this country now understands that China lied, Americans died.
The prospect of a worsening trade relationship between the U.S. and China poses a big threat to the global economy, already hit hard by the COVID-19. Can the Trump administration afford a decoupling from China?
Trump is trying to play whatever cards he has left. One of the few cards he has in his deck is the China card, which is, always something that he falls back on. But the liability of the U.S., cutting off all ties with China are far too great, not only economically, but politically. And it's really not in the cards. So I really don't expect anything to come of that. This idea of a decoupling, Washington, one of the major planks of their trade deal was to try to open up the Chinese economy to U.S. Companies.
The tough talk on China has raised fears of a geopolitical crisis. Chinese media accused Washington of seeking conflicts in other parts of the world and provoking hostility with China.
China's not threatening the U.S. in any way. It's just that China's rise in and of itself threatens the U.S. position as the dominant world power. And the U.S. will do all that it can to prevent that from happening.
Despite the recent tough talk, there has been no coherent and consistent policy on China. Administration officials have been divided by factional infighting and conflicting policy goals, with security hawks often clashing with Wall Street advocates and free traders.
It's a threat today. It's a threat to our businesses and our economy. That is, they're a big competitor with some trade arrangements that clearly disadvantage the United States. From the CIA's perspective, we're watching and tracking closely their capacity to grow their military, to advance their technological capabilities. We're very concerned about China's cyber capacity as well. They're a very capable cyber foe also. The CIA has an enormous role in making sure we understand how they're advancing, the technologies they're interested in, the work that they're doing.
But President Trump has pursued one specific goal that overshadowed any other concern, and that, according to John Bolton, has been to secure his re-election.
Well, obviously, Trump is more concerned with his own re-election and his own situation than anything else. So his policies and his actions are often contradictory, depending on the situation at hand. So he's very prone to contradict himself and to go off on tangents. So there's really, as you mentioned, no consistency in U.S. policy, not only towards China, but towards its allies.
Even in the midst of the trade war, Trump casually offered to reduce tariffs on Chinese goods in order to secure a deal with Beijing that would make him look good in November. The president also pressed China to buy U.S. agricultural products so that he would poll well in Midwestern states.
Bolton claims President Trump asked the Chinese president to help him win re-election. Writing this about President Trump during a meeting last June, quote, he then stunningly turned the conversation to the coming U.S. presidential election, alluding to China's economic capability to affect the ongoing campaigns, pleading with Chinese President Xi to ensure that he, Trump, would win. Trump has stressed the importance of farmers and increased Chinese purchases of soybeans and wheat in the electoral outcome, unquote.
Has Trump undermined U.S. national interests to boost his re-election prospects?
Right now, he's primarily concerned about securing his re-election. So most all of his policies are directed in that fashion. So we really have to wait until the smoke clears after the election. No matter who gets elected, the situation will calm down. A lot of it will have to do with the domestic, situation in the U.S., and whether or not the pandemic lessens, if there's an economic recovery in the works.
In recent months, the United States has stepped up military pressure on China. American Navy ships and Air Force B-1 bombers carried out missions in the disputed South China Sea, sending a message that the United States intends to maintain its military presence in the region. Meanwhile, as border tensions between China and India continue to increase, the US is looking to further engage with India to bolster the country as a geopolitical bulwark against China. Washington is also trying to exploit the dispute between China and Japan over the Diaoyu Islands. Chinese experts say the US is hoping to see a showdown, even an eruption of war between China and its neighbors.
The U.S. is trying to provoke China in order to apply more and more pressure in the South China Sea. These are all regional disputes that the U.S. really has no reason to be involved in.